Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be ranking every single NHL team's #1 center from worst to best. Now with the offseason in full swing, we can finally get into some more player ranking videos, and we're going to go through every single NHL team, picking the top center and then ranking them from 32 all the way down to #1. So when it comes to your favorite team's first line center, where do they place in the rankings? Are they among the worst? Are they among the best? And where do they fit inside the top 32? Make sure you watch till the end for the complete rankings and the complete list, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of you guys aren't subscribed, so if you like hockey and list content, this channel is the place to be, because a lot more content is coming out just like this. Speaking of which, hopefully this will be the first of a long series where we go through wingers, defensemen, goaltenders, so if you want to see more lists like this, hit that like button. It goes a long way. But let's get into today's top 32 and the best centers from worst to best, and let's go on to number 32 here. And I will say the 32nd spot compared to prior years I think is still pretty good. There's not really a horrible first line center on this list, but let's start off with the worst center on the list from the Columbus Blue Jackets. They have the worst top center in Boone Jenner, who in my opinion is still pretty good all things considered, and this last year I thought was extremely underrated. Now of course he's 29, 6'2", and has been with the Blue Jackets for a super long time, being drafted originally by them back in 2011, 32nd overall. But again, for my rankings, I'm mostly basing this off the past 3 seasons, so less about just 1 year, but the past 3 seasons of workload. And when it comes to Jenner, there's obviously been some injury troubles. I mean, he only played 59 games last year, but in those games got 23 goals, 21 assists, 44 points. But in 2021, only 17 points in 41 games, which really puts him, I think, in this last spot and solidifies that. And in 2020, he got 24 points in 70 games. Still a good player, especially today, but you combine some of the defensive issues, in my opinion, and just the amount of missed games over the last few years, that's definitely contributed to his last spot and his 32nd ranking. But now let's move on to number 31, and still among the worst top centers in the league. Let's go on to number 31, and kind of the same similar player as Boone Jenner in Ryan Johansen of the Nashville Predators. Now he had a great year just like Jenner this last season, and I think a lot of that was because of much better shooting luck, but at age 30 was traded from the Blue Jackets to the Preds, and this last year in 79 games got 26 goals, 37 assists for 63 points, was awesome. And that finishing luck was really the biggest thing, because you look in 2021, 7 goals, 15 assists, 22 points in 48 games, and then in 2020 even, maybe his best year besides 2022, he got only 36 points in 68 games. I still consider Johansen a relatively weak first line center, and even though this last year was much better in the shooting luck department, I still think there are some even strength woes, but still at the same time, I guess he's not last place, so there you go, Nashville. Next up, let's go on to another central top centerman, this time from Nashville on to Chicago, and now we go on to Jonathan Toews at number 30, and it's kind of the opposite of both Jenner and Johansen, because with Jonathan Toews, he had a great 2020, missed the entire season in 2021, and then this last year in 2022, in 71 games, got 12 goals, 25 assists for 37 points. But again, you see the entire 2021 season was completely missed, but in 2020, his offensive production was still pretty solid. 42 points in 70 games is nothing to laugh at, and a point per game in the playoffs as well. But I still think everything considered, Jonathan Toews' defensive game has taken some sharp decline over these past few years, and although the offense is still at a pretty good level, I feel like it's just the leadership now that is the main part with Toews' game, and especially at age 34, I'm not really sure how much quality hockey is left in Toews, and you can kind of see with his placement on the list how these last few years have gone for him. But now moving on from the worst 3 #1 centers in the league, let's go on to a pretty interesting player here at number 29 in Trevor Zegras. Now, I think Zegras qualifies. I mean, he was the first line center for most of the season with Anaheim last year, and obviously was in the Calder Trophy running at age 21, has played 2 seasons up to this point and 1 pretty much full season. You can see in 2021 he played 24 games, getting 3 goals, 10 assists for 13 points, and I thought played pretty well all things considered. And then in 2022, in his first full season as a rookie, in 75 games, got 23 goals, 38 assists for 61 points. Now, if I believe he was much better point production-wise in the first half, trailed off a little bit there, but at the same time, I love what Zegras brought in the rookie season, love what he brought in those 24 games back in 2021 to where he is high enough on this list, already play driving at such a brilliant rate, and although I do think there is some finishing luck there with this last year. I still think he's creating so much offense and doing things that on an entire Ducks roster, not many guys are able to do. He'll be higher on this list in a few short years, and I could see him being maybe even in the top 10 if he's able to unlock that full potential. Now let's go on to another Western top center here, and a pretty interesting one too in Ryan Hartman, who I think qualifies mostly with this last year. At age 27, had a career year for the Minnesota Wild. This last year in 82 games, got 34 goals, 31 assists, 65 points, was an absolute monster. But again, you do still have to consider the 3-year sample size here. In 2021 and 2022, in 2021 he got 22 points in 51 games, and in 2020 he got 20 points in 69 games. And we had never seen really that goal scoring and really play pushing until this year, truly in its amazing form. I mean, if he has played at this last year's level over the past 3 years, he would be easily in the top 20, but you see him just a little bit outside that. Still though, he could be much higher on this list next year, and considering that play driving improvement and the physical edge he has, he is definitely a favorite of mine to watch. Now, speaking of Americans that had career years out of nowhere, let's go on to the Buffalo Sabres and their #1 center in Tage Thompson. Coming in on the list at number 27, I just loved watching Tage Thompson this last year at age 24, just came out of nowhere to dominate with the Buffalo Sabres. I mean, in 78 games, he got 38 goals, 30 assists, 68 points, and I think it's more impressive than Hartman's, especially considering Hartman was playing with players like Zuccarello and Kaprizov for pretty sizable time. And even though Tage Thompson did have a couple of good options there, it's Buffalo. He didn't have the wealth of options that Minnesota has, especially on the wings, besides him, and he was still able to put up almost a 40-goal season in his first full season, really. I mean, you go back, he played 65 games in 2019, and he had all these years where he was kind of fiddling between the AHL and the NHL, which is a reason why he's a little bit lower on this list. But I just love just the opportunistic game he was able to bring this last year, the play driving improvements that we saw, especially on even strength, and the Sabres have a special player and a special player down the middle for the next few seasons. Next up, going just outside the top 25 at number 26, and again, all these players are still pretty good, but we're starting to get into the really solid territory here. And at number 26, I'm going to go to the Arizona Coyotes' #1C in Nick Schmaltz. A pretty underrated player in my opinion, all things considered. At age 26, a super inconsistent guy, but when he is on, he is such a fun and electrifying player to watch for the Coyotes. And you see over the past 3 seasons, like even his worst season, I guess considering in 2021, he still got 32 points in 52 games, and this last year was awesome for him. In 63 games, he got 23 goals, 36 assists, 59 points, put up a new career high for goals after getting just above the 2018 mark, got a new career high for assists, and just looked absolutely brilliant in really all zones of the ice. And I think for the Coyotes, even though you do have Logan Cooley coming up, Nick Schmaltz is still an excellent top 6 center to have, and such a great chemistry guy, especially on the power play and in all offensive situations. Now, speaking of underrated, I gotta give some credit where it is due real quick and go on to number 25 and Yanni Gourde, because in my opinion, we are not giving enough credit to Yanni Gourde right now, especially this last year. Like, he was injured for the start of things, but just had a really fun season when he did play. And over the past 3 seasons, you see the success. In 2020 with Tampa, in 70 games, got 30 points. But you see the playoff picture. In 25 games, got 14 points. In 2021, you see, of course, only playing 56 games, but 36 points and 7.6 goals in 23 games played, and 2 straight Stanley Cups. Goes to Seattle, misses a few games, but in 74 games, gets 21 goals, 27 assists, 48 points on that Seattle Kraken team, which, trust me, didn't score many goals last year. And the fact that Gourde had a pretty much almost a career year, I mean, 2018 definitely takes the cake, but a pretty solid year offensively while being on Seattle and still providing great overall value, just shows how underrated he is. Now, this next one might be a little bit of a hot take for how low I have him, but this is a player that I do see being much higher over the next few seasons. Going on to number 24, I have from the Montreal Canadiens Canadiens their number one guy in Nick Suzuki, who in my opinion, yes, I guess you can make the argument that he is rather low, but I think at age 23, there's so much room to grow with Suzuki's game, and I think it's a big part of this Habs retool and the future that the Habs have is Suzuki's performance. Now, over the past 3 seasons, he's done very, very well. In his rookie season in 2020, got 41 points in 71 games. Then the next year, same 41 points, but at a much better points per game rate. And then in 2022, with a disaster Habs roster, in 82 games, still put up 21 goals, 40 assists, 61 points, and was really driving a lot of the offense and a lot of the luck there as well. Now, in my opinion, I think we have seen some kind of inconsistency in his defensive game. There have been some moments and even seasons where he's been amazing defensively. I think 2021 is a great example, but I think we've also seen some moments, especially in 2022, where that defensive game was rather inconsistent and kind of vanished at points. I think for Suzuki, the consistency will be key, and once he's able to get more of that, I think he'll be way higher on this list. But now going on to number 23, and maybe one of the most inconsistent players in the NHL, next up, I've got Evgeny Kuznetsov of the Washington Capitals, and this last year was miraculous for him. In 79 games, got 24 goals, 54 assists, 78 points, and had a resurge of a season. But again, you look at the past couple of seasons, in 2021, that was really a big scare for me in his game. In 41 games, got 9 goals, 20 assists, 29 points, still okay points per game rate, but I felt the injury and especially the consistency he had was just not there. In 2020, he still played pretty well though, got 52 points in 63 games, but you compare that back to like 2018, where he got 83 points in 79 games. I was kind of waiting to see the Kuznetsov that we remembered back, and that's what we kind of saw in 2022. Now, if it was just based off of this last year, he'd be much higher, but I'm really hoping for the Caps, especially with Backstrom gone, that Kuznetsov will be able to keep that type of points level. Next, I'm moving on to number 22, and another pretty inexperienced player on this list, but has already shown so much. Going on to the Ottawa Senators, number one guy in Josh Norris. Now, I guess you could say maybe Claude Giroux, I guess is the first line center now for the Sens, but I'm just going to have Norris just for simplification's sake, since he has been the number one guy for the Sens recently. But at age 23, I've loved him for a long time, and he's been amazing at the NHL level too. Over these last couple of years, he had his true full rookie season in 2021, where in 56 games, he got 17 goals, 18 assists, 35 points. I thought was extremely underrated. And then this last year, had a shooting percentage bender. And even though I think he got a little bit lucky at points for sure, he was still putting himself in amazing positions throughout the season. And in 66 games, he got 35 goals, 20 assists for 55 points. It was his second ever year. He's 23 years old. And again, even though that luck I think will go down, he's already proved himself as an amazing positional shooter, a guy that can contribute in all 3 zones. And although Giroux is obviously there, Norris will be one of the most consistent and important players for the Sens as they hope to get to that next level in the NHL standings. Now let's move on to the last player outside the top 20 and go on to a player that's just not really played that much over the past 3 years in Sean Couturier. Now, normally if Sean Couturier was healthy, I'd probably have him in the top 20, maybe around the 16-17 range, but we just have not seen that, unfortunately, especially with how big his contract is. But over the past 3 seasons, the most amount of games he's played is 69, which is nice, obviously, but it's not nice for the Flyers and their lineup consistency. And even then, in 69 games, got 59 points. In 2021, in 45 games, got 41 points. In 29 games in 2022, got 17 points. Didn't look nearly as good, but I still think when he has played, he's been amazing and has been obviously bringing that great two-way game. But I just think the problem is the health, and that's kind of the biggest reason why he's outside the top 20. But getting us started inside the top 20, let's go on to one of the harder players to rate here in Matthew Barzal, who, to me, I think you could judge all over the place. You could see over these past 3 seasons some lack of offensive results, or at least elite ones, and you could point that towards Trotz. You could maybe point that towards Barzal. I think both sides have a part to play there in some of the struggles that we've seen offensively over the past 3 seasons. I mean, in 2020, he still got 60 points in 68 games. In 2021, 45 points, 55 games. And in 2022, his production was still pretty solid, 59 points points in 73 games. For me personally, I'm really interested to see how he does in Lambert's system, because I feel like Barzal, and maybe deservedly so, should be higher next year with better offensive results and better consistency. But now let's go on to number 19, and another player that in my opinion is pretty difficult to actually rank here, but I'm going to go to the New Jersey Devils' #1 guy in Jack Hughes, who has already made such a big impression, but especially in this last year has taken humongous strides. Now, I do feel like when it comes to Jack Hughes, the 3-year sample size does kind of hurt him a little bit, again, including his rookie year, and even though much better sophomore year, still nothing amazing from him. But this last year in 2022 was rocking. In 49 games, he got 26 goals, 30 assists, 56 points. If we're just rating on that, Hughes would maybe be even around the 10 range, be even that higher. And I do feel like Jack Hughes over these next 3 years is going to continue, maybe even get better in his overall game too. And I love him. I think he's going to be absolutely just dynamite. But right now, as it stands, he's still in the top 20 and still one of the better centers in the league. Now, going on to another centerman that isn't actually that much older than Jack Hughes, now let's go on to Robert Thomas, who fills the number 18 spot for the St. Louis Blues. He's in a weird position for me. I mean, you could go Ryan O'Reilly, I guess, but I feel like Thomas brings just more of a, not importance, but more of a face to that #1 center spot, and I think maybe he could get more playing time, especially on the offensive side of things over these next couple of years. But you see is kind of topsy-turvy last 3 years. Like, I feel like there's very few players that have been kind of as inconsistent in terms of their actual production. You see in 2021, or in 2020, my bad, in 66 games, he got 10 goals, 32 assists, 42 points, was improving after 2019, was looking better and better. And then in 2021, I thought was awful. In 33 games, got 3 goals, 9 assists, 12 points, and I think the production absolutely shows how he played that year. Obviously, he didn't play much, but I thought he was rather poor. And then you go into this year, where he takes just one of the biggest jumps you could ever hope. In 72 games, gets 20 goals, 57 assists for 77 points. One of the speediest players out there, one of the better play drivers, and you consider what he's done this last year. I mean, you can't doubt the results. But I feel like these past 3 years have been great indications of how he's played. 2020, pretty good. 2021, rather poor. And then in 2022, hopefully sets the tempo for the rest of his career. But now getting inside number 17, and we're starting to get into the best of the best here. Next up, I'm going to go to the Detroit Red Wings #1 in Dylan Larkin, who has taken some pretty big strides. Now, looking at his production over the past 3 years, in 2020, got 53 points in 71 games, looked pretty great all things considered after a pretty fantastic 2019 where he was almost a point per game for Detroit. But 2021 was also rather inconsistent. In 44 games, only got 23 points, and I thought kind of looked not unmotivated, but didn't look as strong as he needed to be. But he definitely looked strong and looked competent in 2022. 69 points in 71 games, and was a leader through and through for this Red Wings team in every single area. Got better defensively, got better intensity, and you were seeing it in the results. For me, when it comes to Larkin, again, if he continues that, he will be much higher, but is finally starting to develop some more consistency to his game as the Detroit Red Wings get some more weapons around him. Next up at number 16, just keeping us outside the top 15, and the player just outside that bubble. Let's go on to the San Jose Sharks and move on to Tomas Hertl, who obviously signed that big extension recently. And I think when it comes to Hertl's production and everything, it kind of paints a lesser picture than what he actually provides. But you see over the past 3 seasons, has played a little bit lesser games, which is another reason why I think he's outside the top 15 mark. Played 48 games, got 36 points in 2020, played 50 games in 2021, got 43 points, and this last year in 2022, 64 points, 82 games, and 30 goals, which I thought we got much more back to that 2019 level of Hertl, and that's why I think he's maybe higher than some people expect. But to me personally, even though those numbers aren't jumping out at you necessarily, I feel like Hertl is just one of the more dynamic and smart players in this entire list. Always knows where to be and pushes play in the right direction, and even though he might not get amazing point per game numbers every single year, he's a player that does all the right things well and pushes play exceedingly solidly, and I think for the Sharks is such a valuable player on that 4 group. Next up though, let's move on to the 15th spot and go on to the Winnipeg Jets #1 guy in Mark Scheifele, who I'm not the biggest fan of. I've never really been the biggest Scheifele fan, but you still have to admit just the offensive play that he has. Now, I still think he's one of the worst defensive centers in the entire league, and that definitely puts him outside the top 10 for me, but you still still have to look at the production. The past 3 seasons, 73 points in 71 games in 2020, 63 points in 56 games in 2021, and in 2022 got 70 points in 67 games. Always around that point per game mark and sometimes above it too. Still is such a great tempo guy on offense. But again, I just have some problems with that leadership. I have some problems with that defensive game that is just weak every single shift. And I feel like if he just tried more, he'd be higher on this list with the defensive game that would probably get better as well. Now, just like some other players on this list, we're going to move on to number 14, and some of you guys might laugh at me. I don't really care. To me, this is one of the most underrated players in the entire league and deserves some respect. Going on to 14, though, I have from the Dallas Stars, Roope Hintz. Now, to me, Hintz is just such a unique and interesting player to watch. And over these past 3 seasons, in 2020, in 60 games, got 33 goals. In 2021, though, played 41 games. It was above a point per game with 43 points. And this last year, in 2022, was such a great and really important player for that Dallas Stars offense, where in 80 games, got 37 goals, 35 assists for 72 points. And you also consider the playoff stats. I mean, in 2019, he played 13 games for the Stars in the playoffs, got 8 points. In 2020, got 13 points in 25 games with that run. And in the 6 games they played with the Flames, he played with the Flames, was pretty solid too. To me, when it comes to Hintz, though, again, another player that you can't really look at the numbers too often with, but provides such great skating, such a great speed element, and is so valuable to that Stars offense. And then you also have to combine his brilliant IQ and kind of calculated, driven defensive game. And to me, this is a player that is one of the more underrated two-way centers in the league and also provides excellent offense and excellent production over these last 2 years specifically. But let's go on to another European two-way center here at number 13, and let's move on to Anze Kopitar, the number 1 guy for the LA Kings, still pushing pretty well at age 34. And over these past 3 seasons, you also, even though I think the defensive game has taken a little bit of a step back, you do still have a pretty good calculated game there, and the offense also backs it up pretty well. In 70 games in 2020, got 62 points. In 56 games in 2021, got 50 points. And this last year, still 62 points in 81 games, and a very solid rate there. You combine the leadership he provides, the defensive game he provides, the just calmness he's able to bring, especially on defense and in the neutral zone. To me, this is a player that is still at maybe the top of his game and still one of the better centers and players in the NHL. Now let's move on to number 12, and it pains me to put this player so low, but it has to be done. From the Vegas Golden Knights, I have Jack Eichel, a player that in terms of just pure talent would be top 5, 6, 8. He would be around that range, but unfortunately the past 3 years have been woefully inconsistent in many different ways. Some because of his play, some are just because of health issues. In 2020, you could see his last full great year with the Sabres. In 68 games, got 78 points, 36 goals. But of course, the 2021 season where he had all those neck issues and all the drama surrounding the trade rumors, in 21 games, got 18 points. I still thought played pretty well in those games. And then with the Vegas Golden Knights, in 34 games, got 25 points. I thought also played pretty well, had a little bit of a finishing problem, but I thought also played pretty well defensively, all things considered. And to me, again, all comes back to talent. I still consider that 2020 season a part of the full 3-year sample size, so that definitely puts things into perspective. But I hope if he's healthy this next year, that we'll see the full, true Jack Eichel once again. Now let's move on to the last player outside the top 10, number 11, and going to the Vancouver Canucks, I guess recent first-line center in JT Miller. Now, I would normally consider Elias Pettersson the guy, but JT Miller really took that big next step this last year, and at age 29 has really shown that he's in the prime of his career, and last year in 80 games had an unbelievable season, getting 99 points in 80 games, and an absolute career year through and through. After 2021, only getting 46 points in 83 games, which I know, right, scrub numbers. And then in 2020, also played pretty well, above a point per game in his first season with Vancouver, 72 points in 69 games. To me, JT Miller is just one of the more simple and compact play drivers in the NHL, provides such great even strength offense, and on the power play is also excellent. And even though there are some defensive issues and some consistency issues, when he is on his game, when he is trying 110%, is still one of the better offensive players in the league. But now let's fully get inside the top 10 centers in the NHL, or I guess top 10 centers, the number 1 centers from every single team. Let's move on to number 10 for the Calgary Flames with Elias Lindholm, who has shown great things in his time with Calgary. I mean, again, in his first season with the Flames, he got 78 points in 81 games. Wasn't as good in 2020 or 2021, but this last year had his best season, a point per game, 42 goals in 82 games. And I didn't used to be as big of a fan as Elias Lindholm. I thought at some points, even back in 2019, I thought there was some shooting percentage and some luck going his way. But I think the more seasons he goes with Calgary, the more he's proving me wrong in that department, getting better on even strength, getting better in terms of determination and positioning, and just becoming one of the better offensive centers in the league, as well as having solid defense to boot. Now, going from one Swedish center to the next, let's go on to number 9 and the New York Rangers number 1C in Mika Zibanejad, who, again, right in the prime of his career, has shown great things with the Rangers, especially recently in 2020. In 57 games, he was an absolute monster, getting 41 goals, 34 assists, 75 points, and truly getting into that elite territory. I mean, he got 74 points in 82 games in 2019, but it was where he really started to be amazing. And 2021, a little bit of a downer year, but still 24 goals, 58 points in 56 games. And then this last year was back to a point per game rate where he was pretty great in the assists as well. And the playoffs was huge. 10 goals, 14 assists, 24 points in 20 games played. Just one of the most rock solid and just fun to watch offensive players with his slap shot, with his creativity, and also one of the best power play players in the entire league. Next up, though, let's go on to number 8, and I'm going to go with Brayden Point, my boy, one of my favorite players in the entire NHL, and he's kind of, to me, like the ultra Tomas Hertl, where the production might not be blowing you away, but in almost every single way, he pushes play in the right way, and I think does so many small things that help his team win games, and we've obviously seen that over the past 3 seasons with Tampa Bay. This last year in the playoffs, maybe not as much, but still, I mean, you see the production, 64 points in 66 games in 2020, 48 points in 56 games in 2021, 58 points in 66 games in 2022, hovering around that under point per game mark, but again, I still think he does so much right, and even though defensively, I think he took a little bit of a step back this last year, I think has still a pretty great two-way talent, and I just love what he's able to do on the ice, how calculated he is, and always making the right decisions, and you see the playoff statistics over the years. In 2020, 33 points in 23 playoff games. In 2021, a point per game, 14 goals, 23 points in 23 games. It seems like he's always automatic, and that's the reason why he is so high. Next up, let's move on to the 7th spot, and next up, let's go on to the Carolina Hurricanes, and the Canes' number 1 guy in Sebastian Aho, who just gets better and better overall as the years go by. I mean, for me personally, I mean, going back to, if we're going for the 3-year sample size, in 2020, for instance, I thought his defensive game was one of the weaker compared to the top-end centers, but you still see the production. I mean, over the past 4 years, above a point per game in 2019, around a point per game in 2020, above a point per game in 2021, and then above a point per game again in 2022. Although he hasn't been one of the best two-way centers in the league necessarily, I think he's getting better and better every single year in that department, slowly becoming a much more competent guy, especially physically, but just the brain that he has on offense, the way he's able to weave out of pressure, and the way he's able to produce on a daily basis, just provides one of the better complete centers in the league, especially on offense, and at number 7, I think he's definitely worth this spot. But next up, let's go on to the last player outside the top 5, and next up, I have for the Boston Bruins, Patrice Bergeron. I know some of you guys might say he's too high here, but I mean, it's Patrice Bergeron. He's 37 years old and still winning Selke trophies and is still probably the best defensive center in the entire league, while also providing great offense. Now, is it up to 2019 level? No, but he's still around a point per game in 2020, still around a point per game in 2021, and still around a point per game in 2022. And you look at the playoff stats, very, very good over the past 5 years. And again, combine the fact that, in my opinion, he's still the best defensive center in the league, and you have such a great workhorse that even at age 37, I think is even a better reason. The fact that he's still this good at 37 years old and getting paid $2.5 million to do it, just an absolute beauty, and I think deserves to be this high. But next up, coming in at number 5, and the Florida Panthers top centerman in Alexander Barkov, who has shown great things over these past 3 years. In 2020 was below a point per game, but you see in 2021 just the monster he was in offense and the continual improvement in that area as well in 2022, where he got in 67 games, got 39 goals, 49 assists, 88 points. Now, the funny thing for me personally is that I feel like in 2020, that was maybe his worst defensive year. He was starting to get a lot of acumen as one of the best defensive centers, and I think think in 2020, it kind of started to slip him by just a little bit, but he got back to his great level in 2021, and is at some of his best defensive play in 2022 as well. And he's just at such a great offensive rate, 88 points in 67 games, while also providing that rock solid and amazing defensive two-way game. And to me, there's no place that I'd rather have but this spot. But next up, let's go on to number 4, and a player that has actually kind of a little bit underrated, actually, which I find weird, in Sidney Crosby, still being absolutely amazing at age 35. And if we take the past 3 years into account, in 2020, 47 points in 41 games, in 2021, 62 points in 55 games, and after 2021, he started to hear, I guess, some of the overrated talk, because in 2022, in 69 nice games, got 31 goals, 53 assists, 84 points, and 10 points in the playoffs in 6 games versus the Rangers. He's still one of the best players in the league, still one of the best offensive players in the league, and still at a pretty good rate defensively, especially in 2021, where I thought he was back to some of his prime defensive days. Still one of the best centers out there. But now let's move on to Sidney Crosby's buddy in Nathan MacKinnon, who obviously won the Stanley Cup this last year for the Colorado Avalanche, having that now to his resume, and over the past 3 seasons has proved to be one of the best offensive players in the league. In 2020, in 69 games, got 93 points. In 2021, in 48 games, got 65 points, and this last year in 65 games, got 88 points. Now, I will say this, there might be some people out there saying he should be number 2. So I think some of the reason why I think I have him a little bit lower is some of the games played too. He missed quite a few games in 2020, missed quite a few games in 2021, and missed quite a few games in 2022. Hasn't played a full season since 2019, and I think that kind of factors in. I mean, he's not made of glass by any means, but he can be a little bit fragile here and again. But obviously, you see the playoff statistics and just how good he has been. And in 2022, 24 points in 20 games, and deservedly so, finally being a Stanley Cup champion. But next up, going on to number 2, the best American in the entire NHL in Auston Matthews, and the best player for the Toronto Maple Leafs, bar none. And you see over these past 3 years just how much development there has been in both his offensive and defensive game. And if he kept with his defensive type of game that he had back in 2017, 2018, even 2019, I don't think he'd be over a player like Nathan MacKinnon, maybe even over a player like Sidney Crosby. But the fact you see that production, 80 points in 70 games in 2020, 66 points in 52 games, with the goals scoring 41 goals in 52 games, and then 60 goals, 106 points in 73 games, providing one of the best offenses and best goal scoring abilities in the entire game, while also being one of the better defensive centers, especially over the past 2 years specifically, where he's taken humongous strides in his positional and stick game. And to me, you have that pedigree of goal scoring, you have that pedigree of defensive game, and to me, I feel like he's closer to number 1 than he is to number 3. And then on to number 1, the best center in the entire league, deservedly in the number 1 spot in Connor McDavid. I mean, did you really think I was not going to put Connor McDavid at number 1? I mean, just look at 105 points in 56 games last year, 123 points in 80 games last year in 2022, 33 points in 16 playoff games. He's number 1. Like, that's it. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching for the very end and seeing all the rankings. If you did enjoy, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. Comment down below, because you're bound to disagree with me with something. Let me know, what do you agree and disagree with my rankings, and what would your rankings look like, and where would your top center, in your opinion, be on this list? Let me know your thoughts down below. Of course, share this video with your friends. Get it to anybody, you guys, that know that knows hockey out there online, and click this card for all my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. We'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.